Chapter 0. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. I thought I was a genius. It's embarrassing to look back on now. I really thought I was a genius. I had so much talent that I misunderstood myself as a talented genius. I didn't have much trouble learning new things from my childhood, and I was always ahead of others. Yet, it was only easy in the beginning. At first, I improved faster than the others, but at the same time, I was like others. I didn't think much of it. This could happen. Getting better little by little. I can do it. I am a genius. Eventually, I realized the reality that I didn't want to know. I'm not really a genius. It was because I met a real genius who couldn't compare with me that broke the funny illusion I created myself. A frog in a well that he mistook himself as a genius. When I was feeling superior in my little well, the real genius was already flying in the wide sky. I hate this genius one. Sometimes I hear people speak as if they can do what they can. I see that a lot. Whether they really think so or try to ignore something worse. Anyway, I feel like a shit when I hear it. Are you jealous? I was just a jealous man. So I acted like a shit, but now what kind of jealousy I am feeling? I didn't expect you to think that way. I'm just. Because I feel sorry for you. You're sad? Why? If you tried a little harder. What do you know about my efforts? You could have done a lot better. Hey, I'm still doing well enough. Your standards are extremely high. How can everyone do it like you? Don't think that you're a genius and everyone else can do it like you. Do you understand? I can't do it like you. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Get out. I squeezed out a voice that wasn't coming out. I have a hole in the chest and it seems like they are using magic just to such hole, but it's no use. Please. I never imagined she would make that face. I used to make a mean expression about everything, but I guess I did have a grudge. So. That's why I told you. Just go back. Why are you so stubborn and following me? Senya, put this in first. My voice doesn't come out as I wanted, only blood shot up from my throat. An elixir. Why would you use something precious here that you don't have a few? Don't be so silly. But. No thanks. I know my body best. I can't live any longer. I'm about to die. I'm going to die. He resigned even before he had a hole in his chest. He was a complete fool from the start. Go back, wait. He ignored his worries and criticism and followed him to this point. I could have avoided it. A brusque voice, you were so annoying until the end. You didn't have to do this. Get out of here. I'm sure you knew that this was a situation that would happen anytime soon, although it was a complete crisis, it wouldn't have been good for you. Didn't you know that? I know. We've been together for a long time. What a ridiculous monster are you? I knew a lot of people who talk about you as a monster. You didn't have to die like this. Then how should I have died? You know it too. It was a miracle that I came all the way here. If it weren't for you, I could never have come this far. This is an honorable death. It's hard to speak in this state. I could only tell you this much. I thought it would be a burden if we went together. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to live my life as a cripple. You're really great. I didn't need to cover you up. He flew knowing it. This body, which could not move well, moved unexpected at that moment. In order to save you, I pushed the bad guy away, and I had a big hole in my chest. I'm sleepy, so go now. It's hard to squeeze my voice. My voice starts fading, and I heard sobs not far from my place. I can't lift my fingers now, and my body starts to feel heavy. Slowly, my sight turns black. Thank you. At the end, I heard his voice. Hey, you should have told me earlier if you were going to. But I feel good actually. I've never heard you thanking me in my life. Yes. That's Chapter 1. I used to think that I was a genius, but when I look back at it now, it's so embarrassing that I might just go crazy. However, the fact remains, I truly believed that I was a genius. At the start, I did have enough talent to allow for such a misguided belief. During my childhood, I had no trouble when it came to learning new things, and I was able to improve my skills at a faster rate than others. However, things were only easy at the beginning. Although I improved faster than everyone else at first, when things really got going, I slowed down to match the others' pace. I didn't think much of it at first since I thought that these things could happen. After all, wasn't I still improving little by little? I can still do it. Why? Because I'm a genius. In the end, I was forced to accept the reality that I had tried so hard to reject. I wasn't a genius. It was all thanks to meeting a real genius, one who I couldn't even compare to, that I was finally forced out of this ridiculous and childish delusion. The me who thought I was a genius was but a frog in a well. Inside the comfort of my little well, I had gotten drunk on a false sense of superiority. Meanwhile, the real geniuses were already flying through the wide-open sky. I hated that genius. I felt my killing intent rising whenever I heard him spout nonsense about how anyone could possibly be able to do what he had done if they really tried. Whether or not he really believed what he said, or he was just looking down on the efforts of someone less talented than himself, it still made me feel like shit. Are you jealous? Fuck jealousy. You're the one who started talking shit first. I just returned the favor, so how the fuck am I being jealous? I didn't think that you'd take it like that. I was just feeling sorry for you. The latest _AP_SODIES are on _the website. Feeling sorry? What? If you just tried a little harder. Just what do you know that makes you think you're qualified to preach about hard work? You could be a lot better than you are now. Hey, I'm doing perfectly fine, thanks. Your standards are just too damn high. Do you really think that everyone can be like you? Since you're a genius, don't assume that everyone else is capable of doing what you do. Got that? I can't be as great as you. Fuck off. I could barely squeeze out these words. A gaping hole was running through my chest. To try and treat my wound, they were desperately casting magic and pouring out drops of the precious elixir, but it was pointless. No, please no. She's crying? I never expected a girl like her to make that sort of expression for me. Even though we argued about everything, and she always had a nasty look on her face whenever she talked to me, I guess she still got a little attached to our quarrels. That's why I told you. Just go back. Why did you have to be so stubborn and keep following us? The latest _AP_SODIES are on _the website. Sienna. For now, just put that away. My voice wasn't coming out the way I wanted it to. It was probably because of all the blood rising up my throat. I don't need the elixir. You don't have enough of them to be wasting one here. Don't be foolish. But Dash. Enough. I'm the one who knows my own body best. There's no way I'll survive. I'll be dead soon. I was dying. I had resigned myself to this fact even before my chest had been pierced. In the first place, my body was so broken that it must have looked like I was embarking on a fool's errand. They'd told me to turn back and wait for them, but I had ignored all their worries and their lectures to follow them up to this point. I could have avoided it. His voice was as cold as ever. This son of a bitch. It looks like he'll be a pain to deal with until the very end. So there was no need for you to do this. Didn't I tell you to fuck off already? Even though it's so hard to talk right now, why does he keep yapping at me like this? You should have known that as well. The latest _AP_SODIES are on _the website. His expression showed that he just couldn't understand. There was a chance that he was correct. Even though it might have looked like a desperate crisis to the others, it probably hadn't seemed all that dangerous to him. Didn't I know that? Of course, I did. After all, we've been traveling together for so long. So I knew just what kind of an unspeakable monster he was. And even among all those who called him a monster, I was especially familiar with his abilities. There was no need for you to die like this. Then how else was I supposed to die? He should know it as well. How much of a miracle it was for me to have come this far. Without him, I would never have made it here. At least like this, it's an honorable death. It was so hard to get my voice out, but I had to say this. I would become nothing but a burden if I went on with you, but I didn't want to turn back either. And I didn't want to try and live an ordinary life with this crippled body of mine. Since you're so talented, you really didn't need me to cover for you, right? Even though I knew this, I still threw my body in the way. My body that was no longer able to move properly, just for a moment, moved exactly as I wanted it to. Thanks to that, I was able to push this detestable bastard out of the way, and I ended up with this huge hole in my chest. I'm tired now, so just get going already. Slowly, it was becoming even harder to speak. It felt like my own voice was coming to me from a distance and, from even farther away, I could hear the sound of weeping. My body was so heavy that I couldn't even move a finger. Everything in front of me was growing dark. Thanks. In my final moments, I heard his voice. Bastard, if you're going to say it, why didn't you say it sooner? Still, it made me feel good. After all, this was the first time I'd ever heard him thank me. Wah. Visit for the best no_vel_read_ing experience. What the fuck? If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Devil Killer. All Master. These are just few of the titles given to the Great Vermouth, but the most known title is this. Courageous Heart. The Great Vermouth went on an adventure with his colleagues 300 years ago. This has been an old story told since the time when I was still alive together with the other 4 warriors. The Great Vermouth. The wise Senya. The faithful Anise. The brave Moron. The fool Hamel. Why am I the only one entitled a fool when others are great, wise, faithful, and brave? Every time the nanny read him a fairy tale book, flame burned in Eugene Reinhardt's heart. If only I could have said the right thing. If only I had moved my body properly. Moron, you've been wrapped up as brave. Why am I stupid? Didn't we two exchange the title? No matter how hard he thought about it, he didn't understand the title of his fellow comrade being the brave moron. What a nerve. It must be a moron like a fool. The stupid Hamel always envied Vermouth. Hamel always said that Vermouth was his bigger rival, yet no one thought so. The one who wrote this must have been beaten by me 300 years ago. Eugene gritted his teeth. In reality, he didn't understand the fact that these fairy tales were written as something easy to read, funny and containing lessons because they were targeted to children. Hamel always took the lead against Vermouth. That also happened on the forked road to the mausoleum. Vermouth told them to go to the right, but Hamel insisted that they should go to the left. This is crazy. Eventually, Vermouth listened to Hamel. Yet, there was a devil's trap lurking, the stupid Hamel shouted. The devil had set a trap because he feared me. What a silly Hamel! 10-year-old Eugene clenched his fist. This is a fairy tale book that he had already read hundreds of times, but his anger will always arise in this part. Hamel was a troublemaker. He had a fiery temper, so he often fought with his colleagues. That's right. After many adventures, Vermouth and his colleagues entered the castle. The stupid Hamel did not listen to Vermouth even on the way to Devil's Lair. Hamel, who always took the lead, could not escape the trap, which forced Vermouth and his colleagues to go through many crises. You know nothing about this, sir. Eugene gritted his teeth and complained in his heart about the hellish devil of a castle. The traps there could not be avoided even if we wanted to. We had to push forward even though we knew there was a trap ahead. Hamel fought with his colleagues every time. He was the fool Hamel, the wild Hamel. Even so, Hamel loved his colleagues. Hamel, covered with several wounds, still sacrificed himself for his colleagues, and he had never actually thought about running away. In his final moment, Hamel regretted that he was not honest in front of his beloved colleagues, and said at the end, "Senya, I like you." I didn't actually like her. Anise, please pray for me. I didn't say that. Moron, you're the bravest warrior ever. He's actually an idiot. Vermouth, make sure you defeat the devil. Listening to his final words, Vermouth swore to Hamel's tears. I'll defeat the devil for sure. After that, Hamel closed his eyes comfortably to his words. There was nothing to read beyond this. Eugene closed the book with a crumpled expression. He was sacrificed in a fairy tale for the sake of the future generation. Children, the stupid Hamel also had a righteous heart in his heart. He sacrificed himself for his colleagues, and he already regretted his dishonest past. Oh, shit, who sold my name for this cheap fairy tale? Even after reading it for several times, he was still angry. Eugene threw the children's books and vented his resentment. He felt like he wanted to go to the guy who wrote the fairy tale book and make him shed blood, but the author of this fairy tale book dated back 300 years ago, and he was also anonymous. Vermouth, Senya, Anise, and that moron. Those 4 bastards were shown as the greatest, but why did you make me look like a side character in the fairy tale? Damn it. I cried that way every time when I was lying. Didn't I also thought of protecting my colleagues' honor? After pouring out his resentment, Eugene calmed his breathing. He couldn't have thought that when he died as Hamel, he would actually remember his past and reincarnate. Reincarnation. Eugene recalled the past when he was crying in the cradle. He felt that his childhood was as terrible as facing the devil. His mind has intellect, but his body doesn't move properly, and he also couldn't speak well. What he felt back then was terrible, and he felt bored most of the day. The only thing he can do back then is to chew on a black nipple and look at toys on the ceiling. For a 10-year-old child, there is a reason why his eyes have grown dirty. He had been killing time with his eyes open since was young. Eugene sighed and touched his eyebrows. Reincarnation is a good thing, but why was I reborn as a descendant of Vermouth? Reinhardt is Vermouth's last name. There are a lot of other places to reincarnate with, so why be the descendant of Vermouth? Someone might be behind this happening. Eugene, who had memories of his past life, could not do anything about it even if he wanted to. He wanted to surpass Vermouth in his previous life. Although he didn't sound like a rival in the fairy tale book, it was true that he was conscious about himself throughout his journey with Vermouth. He couldn't let it go, the strong desire of surpassing him, but, no matter how hard he tried to improve himself, the distance between him and Vermouth didn't narrow down at all. The great Vermouth. Eugene looked up. A large portrait was hanging from the wall. The vermouth in it was the same as the one from his memory of a previous life. The stupid Hamel. He took out the mirror with his arms and looked at his face. The face of a 10-year-old child is a face that does not resemble vermouth. However, his family name was Reincarnted, a descendant of the very great vermouth. At first he thought this was just a long dream after death. But, as he became aware of the reality after for a long time, the fool Hamel was reborn as a descendant of the great vermouth. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. At first, he thought this was just a long dream after death. But, as he became aware of the reality after for a long time, the fool Hamel was reborn as a descendant of the great vermouth. In his previous lifetime, Vermouth had several wives and in addition he also had many other mistresses. His body doesn't look like what I have remembered. Did he gain muscle as he got older? Vermouth, as Eugene remembers, was not a muscle man like in the picture, but a skinny guy. I can't believe that Vermouth had many descendants from 10 concubines. I am also a human being, so I quite understand that, but still. 10. Only the descendants of the official wife are recognized as the direct descendants. He may have Reinhardt as a family name, but Eugene's family is just a branch. Although they were not living poorly like the other branch family, their house still cannot compare to the capital's main family house. Even so, the mansion where Eugene lives was luxurious enough to be considered as a big shot in this rural village. This means that even if they weren't from the main branch, they were treated with at least some respect. The most extravagant part in the mansion is where the great vermouth, the master of all the masters, is being shown off, proving the legitimacy of their ancestry. The descendants who inherited the blood of the great master should not neglect training. I've been hearing that since I was a child. Again. Gerhard Reinhardt, seeing his 10-year-old son possessing eyes showing obsessiveness into training, made him kinda feel guilty. He also did not neglect training at an early age, but his past was marked by guilt over the pressure of being at the same blood of the great vermouth. Their ancestor was the great vermouth, but Gerhard had little talent for fighting. You broke it. Every time I see my son, I feel a lot of complications. Hearing unkind words and deeds, his fierce eyes are now without innocence. 1. Eugene had lost his mother since he was young, and he had never cried in search for his dead mother. That's not all. My son's talent is. It is unbelievably great because of the bloodline he possessed. He is a genius. It was embarrassing that his own son has more talent than him, but Gerhard sometimes feared that something may happen to his 10 years old. He is just a young child who has not yet started manipulating mana, but he could already swing his wooden sword very well. I've been doing it many times and now the sword is ruined. Eugene put down the wooden sword, and smacked his lips together. A wooden sword with an iron core is just too heavy to handle with a child's muscular strength. Nevertheless, Eugene insisted on such a wooden sword since he was 7 years old. At first his father thought it was just a childlike stubbornness. It was cute to see him whining and wielding a wooden sword. That was already 3 years ago. Now, Eugene is free to handle that heavy wooden sword, and it didn't even last until the sandbag broke. Gerhard swallowed his saliva and looked at the floor. A broken wooden sword was completely smashed during the practice against the scarecrow. How long has it been since you changed it? Was it 3 days? It's not surprising. Since the beginning of the war, all the scarecrows in the smokestack were destroyed and replaced. The village blacksmith's work is a piece of shit, of course. Eugene spouted. This was a vulgar thing to say from a child, but Gerhard didn't bother to call him out. This was his nature. I tried to correct him from an early age, but my son's nature could not change. I can't believe we're paying to sell such a cheap thing. We have to do purge this trash of work, but father, you are going too easy to this people. Well, I will specially give my attention to them. Next time, they will be a little more robust. I am not talking about the scarecrow, just add more iron in the wooden sword in order to strengthen it. I need a sword that doesn't break just after a few swing. Jihad stared at his son, unable to utter anything. A body that is incredibly disciplined for a 10-year-old child. To be honest, he think he will lose against his son. Compared to me, someone born with no talent. Jihad could not feel pure joy at his son's talent. Was it because he feel like his son is becoming a monster? That's not the reason. Among the many feelings that Jihad feel for his son, there was also a sense of pride. Unlike himself, the father, Eugene is born with a brilliant talent. However, as he feel proud, there was also a guilty feeling. This was inevitable because as a father he wasn't talented. The other Reinhardt family isn't like them. Their branch family has been pushed out from their original home hundreds of years ago, and now they are ignored by the other relatives. Does his son know the truth of their family situation? It is better that his son won't know. It was too difficult for a child to understand. Can't I use a real sword? Jihad shook his head with a wry look. Not yet. Because I am still a child?
Yeah.
Chapter 2. Demon Slayer, God of War, Master of All, these were some of the many titles given to the Great Vermouth. But among all these titles, there was one that best described him, that of the hero. 300 years ago, our hero, the Great Vermouth, set out on an adventure along with his companions. It was an old fairy tale that had been read to him ever since he could walk. It was about the adventures of the Great Vermouth, the wise Sienna, the faithful Anise, the brave Molin, and the stupid Hamel. All the others get called great, wise, faithful, or brave, so why am I the only one who gets called stupid? Whenever his nanny read him this tale as a bedtime story, a raging fire was stoked in Eugene Lionheart's chest. If only he could speak properly instead of babbling. Or if, at the very least, he could move his body properly. Even that blockhead Molin got packaged as the brave one. So why am I the stupid one? Did the two of us get switched at some point? No matter how much he racked his brain, he couldn't understand how they had come up with the brave Molin. The brave? They don't know jack's hit about him. More like, the foolish Molin. The stupid Hamel was always jealous of Vermouth. Hamel called Vermouth, who was better than him at everything, his rival. Although no one else actually agreed with this. The bastard who wrote this must have been someone who I beat up in the past, Eugene spat out as he ground his teeth in anger. Actually, it wasn't that difficult to understand why the contents of the story were like this. These bedtime stories were aimed at children, so they needed to be easy to read as well as fun and educational. Hamel was constantly running ahead of Vermouth. He kept this up even when they reached the crossroad leading to the Demon King's castle. Although Vermouth said they needed to go right, Hamel was stubborn and insisted on going left. Bullshit. Eventually, Vermouth agreed to listen to Hamel. However, along the path they took, a devilish trap was lying in wait for them. Stupid Hamel! He shouted boastfully that the Demon King had laid a trap for them because the Demon King was afraid of him. What an idiot! The 10-year-old Eugene clenched his fist tightly. He might have already read this story hundreds of times, but each time he reached this point in the story, rage welled up within him. Hamel was a troublemaker. He had a fiery personality, so he frequently ended up fighting with his companions. They got that part right. After many adventures, Vermouth and his companions entered the Demon King's castle. Even after entering the Demon King's castle, stupid Hamel refused to listen to Vermouth. Hamel, who kept running ahead, couldn't avoid any of the traps, and thanks to that, Vermouth and his companions experienced many crises. Like this bastard even knows what it was like, scolded Eugene through gritted teeth. The traps in the hellish Demon King's castle weren't something one could avoid just because they wanted to, so even though they had known that traps laid ahead, they still had no choice but to break through forcefully. Hamel was always arguing with his companions. Stupid Hamel. Rude Hamel. However, Hamel loved his companions. Hamel, who was covered in scars, sacrificed himself for his companions instead of running away. In his final moments, while cradled in the arms of his loving comrades, Hamel regretted that he had never been honest with them. "Sienna," he said, "I've always liked you." "I didn't like her." "Anise, please pray for me." "I didn't say that." "Molin, you're the bravest warrior." "That bastard was just a blockhead." Visit for a better user experience. Vermouth, make sure to defeat the Demon King. Vermouth swore an oath on Hamel's tears that he would definitely defeat the Demon King. At these words, Hamel peacefully closed his eyes. There was nothing more to see after this. With a furrowed brow, Eugene closed the book. So my character was sacrificed for the sake of a good bedtime story. Countless children had been taught a lesson about how even someone like stupid Hamel could hide a righteous heart inside his chest. He had sacrificed himself for his comrades, and he had even regretted being dishonest. Fuck, did they really have to sell my good name for such a cheap lesson? Even though he had read it several times, he still got angry every time. Finally, venting his rage, he threw the book across the room. He secretly desired to find the person who had written the story and beat them to a pulp, but the author of this book, which had already been around for 300 years, was anonymous. Vermouth, Sienna, Anise, and Molin, you four are also to blame, you bastards. How could you allow a fairy tale like this to be written? Damn you, Sienna. Even though you cried like that when I snuffed it. Did none of you even consider protecting your dead colleague's honor? He suspected that might actually be the case, or at least he did once he had recovered from his outburst and caught his breath. After all, it wasn't like they could have expected that Hamel would be reincarnated with a complete memory of his past life. Damn reincarnation. Eugene recalled all the time he had spent crying in his crib. In his opinion, his years of infancy were just as torturous as going through the Demon King's castle. On top of his thoughts being fuzzy, he couldn't even move or speak properly. So he was forced to spend every day of those long and terrible years chewing on a pacifier or staring up at the mobile hanging from the ceiling. There was a reason why, as a 10-year-old, he had such a foul look in his eyes. From a young age, he had been forced to kill time by just staring into the distance. Eugene released a heavy breath as he rubbed the bridge of his nose. I'm fine with reincarnation, but why'd I have to get reborn as one of Vermouth's descendants? Vermouth's surname was Lionheart. If I'm going to get reincarnated, aren't there a lot of places that I could have gone to? So why, of all things, did I get stuck with Vermouth's bloodline? Anyone else might have celebrated having such a powerful background, but there was no way that Eugene, who still had the memories of his previous life, could do that. All his life, he had wanted to outshine Vermouth. Although he hadn't yelled about being rivals as the story claimed he did, it was true that Hamel had tended to be conscious of the guy throughout their journey. In the end, he hadn't been able to escape Vermouth's shadow. No matter how hard he practiced and strived, he still couldn't shorten the distance between them. The Great Vermouth. Eugene raised his head and looked at the large portrait hanging on the wall. The Vermouth depicted within it looked exactly the same as his memories from his past life. The stupid Hamel. He took a mirror out of his vest and looked at his reflection. The face of a 10-year-old child looked back, one who didn't resemble Vermouth in the slightest. However, since his last name was Lionheart, he really was a descendant of Vermouth. At first, he had thought that this was all just a long dream following his death. However, he had long since come to accept that this was his new reality. The stupid Hamel had reincarnated as the descendant of the great Vermouth. During his lifetime, Vermouth had many concubines alongside his legal wife. He wasn't someone who seemed overly interested in women, but I guess he changed with age. The Vermouth from Eugene's memories wasn't just abstinent, he was practically ascetic. To think that such a man would end up with 10 concubines and a whole host of descendants. Visit. For a better user experience. In the end, he was still human after all, so I guess I get it. Only the descendants of the legal wife were recognized as the direct lineage of Vermouth. Although Eugene's family was also surnamed Lionheart, they were only of a collateral line. Even so, it wasn't like they were left destitute. Although it might not be much compared to the main estate in the capital, Eugene's family mansion was lavish enough to seem showy in its rural surroundings. So even though they were just collateral descendants, they were still being treated according to their station. Within this spacious mansion, the gigantic gymnasium especially showcased its majesty. Descendants who inherited the blood of the great Vermouth, the hero, the god of war, the master of all, were not allowed to neglect their training. These words had been hammered into Eugene from a young age. Not again. Gerhard Lionheart looked down at his 10-year-old son with tired eyes. While he had also been diligent in training from a young age, his young son had already put all his past efforts to shame. Although he might also be a descendant of the great Vermouth, Gerhard actually had no talent for the martial arts. It really did break. Whenever he saw his son, he couldn't help but feel mixed emotions. From Eugene's behavior, which wasn't like a child's, to his sharp eyes that didn't hold a shred of innocence, Gerhard felt there was always some distance between them. Even though Eugene had lost his mother when he was young, Gerhard had never once seen his son cry out for his dead wife. And that wasn't all. His son's talent was great, so great that it was hard to believe that they shared the same blood. He's a monster. Although this wasn't an appropriate thought to have about his only son, Gerhard couldn't help but feel fear at times. He was only 10 years old, a child who had yet to even dabble with mana, but his skill when wielding a wooden sword needed to be seen to be believed. I was just swinging it, and it broke. Eugene lowered the sword with a click of his tongue. The wooden sword had been embedded with an iron core, making it too heavy to handle with just the strength of a child. Even so, Eugene had insisted on using a sword like this one ever since he was 7 years old. At first, Gerhard had thought it was just childish stubbornness. He had even thought it would be cute to see Eugene try and wield it with tears in his eyes. However, it had already been 3 years since then. Now, Eugene could wield this sort of heavy wooden sword with ease and had even gone on to add sandbags when the initial weight proved insufficient. Gerhard gulped as he looked down at the floor, which was strewn with pieces of a broken wooden sword and a completely shattered practice dummy. How long had it been since the dummy was last replaced? Around 3 days? But this wasn't anything to be surprised about. Every single one of the practice dummies in the gymnasium had to be replaced at some point. The village blacksmith's skills are garbage, Eugene growled. Although these words were too harsh to come from a child's mouth, Gerhard didn't bother to point this out. That was just part of Eugene's innate character. Gerhard had struggled to correct his son's manners throughout his childhood, but Eugene's wild nature hadn't changed a bit. Doesn't he feel ashamed to accept money in exchange for this crap? He should be summoned and given a thrashing, but father, you are just too merciful. That's... ahem. Don't waste your time thinking about that. Next time, we'll get something a little more durable. Don't bother with the practice dummy, just get me a whole block of high-purity iron. It's just going to get smacked by a wooden sword, so there's no need to give it a shape. Gerhard just stared at his son, unable to find the words. He noticed that his son now had such a hardened physique, it was hard to believe he was just 10. To be honest, if they fought barehanded, he suspected that he might even lose. "I've fathered a caveman." Gerhard was unable to feel pure joy regarding his son's talent. Was it because he felt that his son was a monster? No, that wasn't the reason. Among the many feelings that Gerhard had for his son, there was also a sense of pride. Unlike his father, Eugene had been born with brilliant talent, so how could he not feel pride? However, along with this pride came a sense of guilt. It was an indisputable fact that, as a father, he was lacking in influence. Just because the descendants of Vermouth were all Lionhearts, it didn't mean that the families were all treated the same. It had already been hundreds of years since Gerhard's branch of the family was forced out into the countryside, and they mostly went ignored even among the collateral branches. Should he tell his son about the reality of the situation? No, it would be better not to. After all, wasn't such a topic too difficult for a young child to understand? Can't I just use a real sword? Without even considering it, Gerhard bitterly shook his head. Visit for a better user experience. You can't do that yet. Because of the bloodline continuation ceremony? That's right. If you take part in the bloodline continuation ceremony 3 years from now, you'll be allowed to wield a real sword. Isn't it fine if we just keep it a secret between the two of us? Something like that is not allowed. Because I am a Lionheart, I can't just ignore family traditions. The bloodline continuation ceremony was a Lionheart family tradition that took place once every 10 years. During the ceremony, all children from the ages of 10 to 15 who bore the name Lionheart, both direct and collateral descendants, were called to the main estate. The reason for this ceremony was simple. It was to decide who among them were best suited to carry the Lionheart name. After all, wasn't it an embarrassment to claim to be the descendants of the hero without first proving it? So until that day, they weren't allowed to wield a sharpened true weapon until the bloodline continuation ceremony was over. What a stupid tradition. Eugene didn't allow his thoughts to slip out. However, whenever he heard anything about the bloodline continuation ceremony or the family's traditions, he felt disgust and disbelief churn in the pit of his stomach. The only purpose that the bloodline continuation ceremony served was to suppress the collateral descendants. The children of the collateral lines weren't allowed to wield real weapons until after the bloodline continuation ceremony. They also weren't allowed to train their mana. However, the children of the direct line residing in the capital estate were free to wield any weapon they wanted, regardless of their age, and they started learning how to use mana as soon as they could walk. That's what it's all about. They want to beat it into them from a young age that the collateral descendants can never outdo the direct descendants. This act of bullying was so obvious that even a child could see it. Much less Eugene, who, although young in body, had the mind of an adult. Gerhard couldn't see what was going on inside his son's head. However, he got some idea of what Eugene was feeling from his sullen expression. Although he thought the sight of his frustrated son's face was quite cute, his guilt grew even heavier. If only he was born to the direct line. His son's talent was brilliant, but clear limitations were placed on the Lionheart family's collateral descendants. In the bloodline continuation ceremony 3 years from now, although his son was so outstanding that it was hard to believe he was still a child, there was no way he could compete with the true inheritors who had grown up in the main household. Such a reality made Gerhard feel tormented. If only he had been born without talent like his father, then Eugene wouldn't have to feel the gap between his innate talent and the challenges posed by reality. Why do you have that sort of look on your face, father? No, it's nothing. As if. You can clearly tell that he's blaming himself again for not being able to give me the best opportunities. Eugene clicked his tongue as he stared at Gerhard. Because of his clear memories from his previous life, it was difficult to regard Gerhard as his father. However, it was impossible to deny that he had been reborn as Gerhard's son. Father. It's been a long time, so why don't we do some play fighting? What? I said, play fighting. Eugene didn't mention the word spar. He was trying to be considerate of his father's feelings if his 10-year-old son were to challenge him to a spar. That's why he used the word play instead, but Gerhard's expression still froze in horror. Gerhard first felt the weight of his gut dragging him down. Then he looked at his son's arm brandishing the iron-cord wooden sword like a toy. Let's leave that for next time. If his 10-year-old son were to accidentally use his full strength while playing. Gerhard quickly retreated while sweating buckets, just thinking about it. Eugene giggled as he watched his father make his escape. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. TL notes, in the ROS when the name is read is equals Reincarnted, so I translated it as Reinhardt, but as I translate the third chapter 1 realized that the Western surname is Lionheart. Fortunately I found it soon. Although Vermouth and the Holy Sword were always highlighted in paintings and in fairy tales, within Eugene's memory, the Holy Sword was not a good weapon as it was exaggerated in the story. It was just some flash of light. Even if it was a lot of help during the time on the Black Mausoleum, that was just all. In the first place, the sword was meant to be a ceremonial sword known for its appearance, and Vermouth did not really enjoy using it. He just sometimes uses it to kill some ghost. Master of all, Vermouth. As the nickname says, Vermouth had mastered many weapons. He stored them in his subspace and took the appropriate weapon depending on the situation. He was also a genius in magic. Eugene. Hamel never mastered magic. Even if I had learned it with determination, wouldn't I have done as much as anyone else? Probably so, but he never thought he needed at the time. When one was a kid who mistook himself for being a genius. He was too arrogant for himself to learn magic. The meeting with Vermouth changed much of Hamel's. There was a genius who was good at everything. Little Hamel believed he was such a genius, but his illusion was shattered when he encountered the real genius. I'm not a genius. What about now? Eugene tilted his head while clenching his fist tightly. I have a memory of my past life. I will be stronger than I used to be. He was sure about that. However, Eugene did not want to be satisfied with the level. He was reincarnated like this. What's the point of being on a similar level as in his previous life? He was reincarnated as a descendant of Vermouth. Vermouth. Eugene thought while pressing his hard arm. I think I like your blood. How long will a child's muscles start to grow? However, apart from the size of the muscles, the body was ideal. Eugene had no choice but to admit the fact. It may not be too big, but it is a flexible body, so it is full of elasticity. I can't think of it as a child's body with a small muscle density. The same goes for bones. Even if I roll it hard, I don't get hurt, and the wounds heal quickly. I've always self-proclaimed myself as a genius, but I couldn't compare to you. I can now understand how strong you were. The performance of the body is different. That fact brought joy and bitterness to Eugene. If only I had this body in my previous life. That's a nasty idea. Eugene shook his head to shake off his frustration. His self from previous life is as far as it goes. Why do I have to regret my past life when I've been reincarnated? Eugene thought so and shook off his feelings. However, he could not shake off all his regrets. The only thing left for Hamel was a stupid nickname. What about the others? The Great Vermouth. He returned with this title while serving as a duke in his hometown, Kiel. He was praised as a hero to the end. The Kingdom of Kiel has made the death of Vermouth a state funeral and still commemorates the anniversary of Vermouth's death. The wise Senya. She was the youngest woman ever to be invited to the magic kingdom of Aroth. In Aroth, there are 5 towers. Now, 2 of the towers were headed by the disciples of Senya. The faithful Anise. The helpless woman is also called a saint in Uruz, the Holy Empire. She taught how to write a scripture. The brave moron. Eugene couldn't believe his track record. That stupid moron built his own kingdom. He assembled refugees from the area where the devil's army swept through, and he established a kingdom named after himself? The last thing I couldn't understand is this. Eugene crumpled his expression. When this idea comes to his mind, anger always rises. They were all doing well before they died. But why are there still demons in the world? Hamel from a previous life wandered around Helmand with his colleagues. He led the total army sent from each country and killed 3 of the 5 demon kings. On the way to the 4th demon, Maosung. The fool Hamel died there. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. I remember my moment of death clearly. Vermouth and his colleagues believed they would kill all the remaining demon kings. But in reality? Of course, the world has become peaceful. The devil doesn't want to conquer the world anymore. All because the great Vermouth made a promise with the devil. Why did you make that promise? Weren't you supposed to kill them all? Eugene doesn't know why. Anyway, the war with the devils ended, and the world became peaceful. This peace has lasted for 300 years. You're too nervous, aren't you? Eugene looked up at the voice he heard. They were currently in a luxurious carriage and sitting opposite to him there was a middle-aged man with a long face. It's my first time in the capital. Eugene mumbled, glancing out the window. He left the countryside mansion. I arrived at the city by carriage all day. After a few warp gates, he stepped on the capital's land. I understand. The man's name is Gordon. He was a knight who swore allegiance to the main house of Lionheart and an escort to pick Eugene up. Eugene, may I give you one piece of advice? Yes. If you're already nervous before coming to the main house, every day in the future will be very painful. Gordon's expression was not joking. He was expressing his concern in the name of advice. Eugene smiled as he felt him. Thank you for your advice, Sir Gordon. Eugene is well aware of his situation. However, Eugene's family is ignored even during the break. But first of all, it's Lionheart family, but only one driver came to pick me up. My father couldn't even come with me. Eugene glared out of the window without erasing his smile. It was a very blatant cheap move. You're going to kill Small Fry from the start? Small Fry. Vermouth, this is all because you were fooling around. Eugene can already imagine what was going to happen. Seeing that they are already raising the killing flag, he'll receive a more explicit check from the moment he gets to the main house. Are they going to welcome every descendants with a paper scroll in hand, shouting their name out loud together with the name of the place where they came from? Just so they could know how sloppy a person's background is? No, that's only for someone they can treat. Seeing that only one knight has been escorted, they won't give me a welcoming ceremony. How many people will participate in this blood ceremony? If I include you, Eugene, there will be 6 people. 3 people will participate in the main house. 3 people from the main house? Eugene pretended to be surprised, but he already knew who was attending the blood ceremony in advance. It was thanks to Jahard's special attention. The 3 members of one's family, one is the son of Yong-sil, and the other 2 are Seo Chol's twins. What he should pay attention to is the 2 from a family that is both marginal and powerful. The oldest was 15. Also, there's someone younger than me. Eugene is now 13 years old. I couldn't hold my sigh when I realized my new age. I mean, I will be competing with 10-year-old kids. Eugene, never compete with the children of your family. No matter how good you are, you won't be a match for children in your family. I mean. Eugene recalled the gloomy look on Jahard's face. He couldn't hide his fear that his son might be devastated by the children he saw. I'm looking forward to seeing how good the descendants of Vermouth are. Eugene drew attention from outside the window. The capital's spectacular scenery had already passed by, and now the wagon was out of the city and across the forest. From here on, it's Lionheart's estate. It was a forest surrounded by tall walls. Oh, you don't have to get ready to get off already. We still have to go a long way from here. Gordon grinned and said mockingly. I wish the ground was wider, you little bastard. Why are you shrugging when it's not even your land? Wow, this vast forest is the property of the main house? Yes. Isn't it uncomfortable to be this wide? There are warp gates everywhere. Really? But why am I riding a carriage now? That's because Eugene didn't get permission to use warp gate. Eugene stared out of the window, answering the questions in his head. As Gordon said. After a long run, the carriage stopped. Gordon got off the opposite door and opened the door on the side where Eugene sat. Welcome to Lionheart's home. Gordon bowed politely and said. A wide-open front door dot the mansion you can see beyond. Not a single crowd came out to welcome you as I thought. Lionheart. Eugene slowly raised his eyes. White flags lined up from the entrance of the main gate. The brave lion painted in the center. Lionheart, Vermouth. Eugene looked down at his chest. His clothes are not engraved with any patterns. The only thing that can engrave a lion's pattern on the left chest symbolizing Lionheart's direct line. I should have left some descendants behind. Hamel of a previous life was never married and had no children. No, I'm good at not having any children. If I do that, I'll have some regrets. Still. Seeing the family flag lined up like that, Eugene felt sorry for my past life. Have the other relatives come yet? Eugene is the first. What the hell? Eugene nodded to do so. Asterisk. Eugene was guided by a separate house away from the main building of the mansion. All the way here, I couldn't even see the relatives of my family, who had a lion engraved on their left chest. Why is it so expensive? If a 13-year-old relative came, wouldn't he come to see it just out of curiosity? This is Nina. However, the treatment was not very harsh. As soon as he arrived at the separate house, he got a personal servant. It was a young girl who didn't look much older than Eugene, but Eugene didn't feel much dissatisfaction with her. If you need anything, ring this bell. Nina bowed her head and handed Eugene a small bell. May I speak comfortably? Yes, of course you should. Do I use all of this detached house? Eugene looked around the spacious annex and said, he just said it for confirmation. Eugene knew it wouldn't happen. Nina is too young to supervise a single detached house. That's not true, but you won't feel uncomfortable staying. I have to stay with other relatives. Yes. Do you know when you're coming? Everyone should be there in 4 days at the latest. Eugene grinned at the answer. He meant to stay here for 4 days. Is the mist behind you? What? Yes. Do you need permission from your family to wield a wooden sword? That's... No way. Eugene smiled and headed for the ballroom. Nina followed Eugene even though she didn't know what to do. Chapter 3. In the legends and pictures from the fairy tales, the image of Vermouth with the holy sword was always in center place, but according to Eugene's memories, the holy sword wasn't as great of a weapon as the stories made it out to be. Though it did shine pretty brightly. It provided all sorts of help in the dimly lit Demon King's castle, but that was it really. In the first place, as the holy sword was more of a ceremonial sword with an emphasis on appearance rather than function, Vermouth didn't actually like to use it that much. It was to the extent where it was only taken out occasionally to deal with especially tough demons. Vermouth was a master of many different weapons, which had gained him the titles of God of War and Master of All. That guy would pull all sorts of weapons out of his subspace whenever he needed to use something in particular. And on top of all that, he was also good at magic, thought Eugene. Throughout his life, Hamel had never learned any magic. I'd like to think that if I had devoted some time to cracking it, I'd have been better than the average Joe. But even if that were the case, at that time, he hadn't spared magic a single glance. Back when he was a child and still thought he was a genius, the idea of learning magic had never even crossed his mind. That would probably have continued to be the case even if I hadn't met Vermouth. Hamel had gone through a lot of changes after meeting Vermouth. In this world, there were people called geniuses who could excel at everything they tried. Young Hamel had believed himself to be such a genius, but an encounter with a true genius had shattered this childish delusion. He learned that he wasn't a genius. But now? With a click of his tongue, Eugene tilted his head. I have memories of my past life. If that was all I had, then I could easily become as strong as I was back then. He was certain of this. However, Eugene didn't want to be satisfied with reaching just that level of strength. Since he had even reincarnated like this, what meaning would there be in staying at the same level that he had reached in his previous life? After all, he had been reincarnated as a descendant of that Vermouth. Vermouth, thought Eugene as he massaged his thick arms, it looks like there really is something to your blood. Even if a child worked out, they weren't physically able to put on much muscle. However, Eugene had no choice but to admit that, apart from the size of the muscles, his new body was perfect. Although he might not have bulked up, his whole body was wiry and flexible, and it was hard to imagine that a child's body could have such dense musculature. His bones were equally sturdy. Even if he pushed his body to the breaking point, it didn't cause any sequelae, and even serious injuries healed quickly. Although my previous body was already good enough to be mistaken for a genius, there's no comparison. It's enough to make me understand how you could have gotten so strong. From the start, the base specs of their bodies had been different. This fact brought feelings of both joy and bitterness to Eugene. If he had had a body like this in his previous life. It's pointless to think about it. Shaking his head, Eugene rid himself of the idea. His past life belonged in the past. Since he had been reincarnated like this, why bother with the regrets of his previous life? With these thoughts in mind, Eugene attempted to shed his attachments to the past. However, he couldn't quite let go of his regrets. After all, wasn't the only thing that Hamel had left behind as his legacy was that fucking insulting nickname of the stupid Hamel? And what about the others? After returning to his homeland in the Kiel Empire, the great Vermouth served as a duke before eventually returning the title. He was praised as a hero until the very end. The Kiel Empire held a state funeral for Vermouth's death, and, even now, the anniversary of Vermouth's death was commemorated by the empire. As for the wise Sienna, that uncute girl was invited to the magic kingdom of Aroth, where she became the youngest person in history to rise to the position of a magic tower's head wizard. Although there were only 5 magic towers in Aroth, 2 of them currently had one of Sienna's direct disciples serving as their heads. The faithful Anise, that rotten woman, had actually ended up being canonized as a saint by the Holy Empire of Eurus. Her teachings were so respected that they were even being passed down as a separate volume of scripture. And Eugene just couldn't believe what the brave Molin was said to have done. It was claimed that Molin, that blockhead, had actually founded a kingdom. Did he really manage to gather all the refugees from the lands that had been ravaged by the Demon King's forces and establish a kingdom in his own name? And here's the part that I'm finding the most difficult to understand. The latest _AP_SODIES are on _the website. Eugene furrowed his brow. Whenever his thoughts turned to this matter, it was always at this point that he felt a familiar surge of rage. It seems like everyone was doing just fine until they died, so why are the demons still around? In his past life as Hamel, he and his companions had ventured into the Devildom of Helmuth. While leading the subjugation forces sent from every country, they had killed 3 of the 5 demon kings. Stupid Hamel then died at the 4th demon king's castle. He clearly remembered that, at the moment of his death, he had believed that Vermouth and his other companions would definitely slay the remaining demon kings. However, how were things in reality? The world was at peace, of course. The demon kings no longer held any ambitions of conquering the world, and it was all due to the oath that the great Vermouth had made with the demon kings. Why did he end up making an oath like that? Weren't we supposed to wipe them all out? He didn't know the reasons behind it. But in any case, the war with the demon kings was over, and the world was at peace. A peace that had lasted for over 300 years and continued to the present day. Perchance, are you feeling a bit nervous? Eugene lifted his head as he heard a voice speaking to him. He was currently riding inside of a luxurious carriage. A middle-aged man with a stiff face was sitting in the seat across from him. It's because this is my first time in the capital, Eugene muttered as he looked out of the window. He had left behind his mansion in the countryside and arrived at the nearest city after a day's travel in a horse-drawn carriage. Then, after going through several warp gates, he had finally stepped foot in the capital. I understand how you feel, the man sympathized with Eugene. The man's name was Gordon. He was a knight who had sworn allegiance to the main house of Lionheart, and he was currently serving as Eugene's escort. Master Eugene, would you mind if I give you a piece of advice? Sure. If you're already feeling nervous, then every day spent at the main estate will feel extremely tortuous. There wasn't a single sign of amusement on Gordon's face. And even though these words had been offered as advice, there wasn't a trace of concern either. Sensing this, Eugene grinned. Thank you for your advice, Sir Gordon. Eugene was well aware of his current plight. As they weren't part of the direct bloodline, the reality was that the collateral descendants were forced to treat even the knights who had been assigned to escort them with wary respect. Much less Eugene's household, who were beneath the notice of even the other collateral branches. Even so, I'm still a Lionheart. They only sent a single knight to escort me, and my father wasn't allowed to accompany me either. Without dropping his smile, Eugene turned back to stare out the window. Although they aren't being too obvious about it, they're really trying to put us in our place. I guess they're getting a head start by crushing our spirits? Bastards. Vermouth, this is all because you went and sowed your seeds all over the place. Eugene imagined how things might unfold in the near future. Seeing as how they were already trying to crush his spirit, he would probably be subjected to even more blatant oppression the moment he arrived at the main house. Maybe they'll gather all their knights to welcome us and then loudly announce exactly who is arriving and how humble their background is. No, they would save that sort of thing for those who were actually being treated as competition. Seeing how they had only sent one knight to escort him, they probably wouldn't even bother to arrange a welcoming ceremony for him. How many people are participating in this year's bloodline continuation ceremony? Including Master Eugene, there are 6 people from the collateral lines. In addition, 3 heirs from the main house will also be participating. 3 from the main house? Although Eugene had pitched his voice in an attempt to feign surprise, he had already known in advance who was attending this year's bloodline continuation ceremony. This was all thanks to Gerhard taking special precautions. Visit for the best no_vel_read_ing experience. Of the 3 people from the direct bloodline, one was the first wife's son, and the other 2 were twins born from the second wife. Within the 5 from the other collateral bloodlines, the only ones who needed to be paid any attention were the 2 from families who had gained quite the prestige despite being collateral bloodlines. I think the oldest was only 15, and there are those even younger than me. Eugene was 13 years old. Upon recalling his current age, he couldn't hold back a sigh. All because of this tradition. Was he really being asked to compete with 10-year-olds? Eugene. Whatever you do, don't try to compete with the children of the main house. No matter how excellent you are, you won't be an opponent for the children of the direct bloodline. That's why you should. Eugene recalled the gloomy expression that Gerhard had held at that time. His father couldn't hide his fear that his son might fall into despair once he encountered the children of the main household. Still, I can't help but feel excited to see how talented Vermouth's descendants are. Eugene tore his eyes away from the window. They had already passed by all the splendid scenery the capital had to offer, and now the carriage was leaving the city behind and entering a forest. From this point on, we have entered the Lionheart estate. The forest was surrounded by tall walls. But there's no need to be in a hurry to get your things ready. We still have a long way to go from here. Even though he hadn't been getting ready to leave the carriage at all, Gordon still smiled as he gave this teasing advice. I get it, you bastard. Must be nice to have such a large estate. It's not even your land, so why are you acting so smug? Whoa, so this whole forest is the private property of the main house? Yep. If it's this large, isn't it inconvenient getting around? There are warp gates installed everywhere. Is that so? Then why am I currently riding in a carriage? That's because we couldn't even be bothered to give Master Eugene permission to use the warp gates. While holding this back-and-forth conversation inside his head, Eugene continued to stare outside the window. Just as Gordon had said, the carriage finally came to a stop after driving on for quite some time. After opening the door on his side and getting down from the carriage, Gordon walked over to open the door for Eugene. Welcome to the Lionheart family's main estate, Gordon said politely, with a bow of his head. The mansion was visible through the wide-open gates. Just as expected, not a single person had come out to welcome him. The Lionheart. Eugene slowly raised his gaze. White flags lined the path leading up from the main gate entrance, and a brave lion was embroidered in the center of each flag. This was the personal sigil of the main house. Vermouth's Lionheart. Eugene looked down at his own chest. His clothes were bare of any decoration. Only Vermouth Lionheart's direct descendants were allowed to have the lion sigil sewn onto their left chest. If only I had also left descendants. In his previous life, Hamel had neither married anyone nor had any children. No. It's a good thing I didn't have any. If that were the case, I would have been left with some pointless regrets. Still, seeing the family's flags lined up like this, he couldn't help but feel regret for his past life. Have any of my other relatives arrived yet? Master Eugene is the first to arrive. Hooray, Eugene thought with a nod of his head. The place where Eugene was led to was an annex built off of the main hall. On the way there, he hadn't even caught a glimpse of a single relative who bore the lion on their chest that showed they belonged to the main family. Why were they being so aloof? Shouldn't they at least feel some curiosity and come to take a look at the arrival of their 13-year-old relative? But at least he wasn't being received with complete rudeness. Upon arriving at the annex, he found that a single personal attendant had been attached to him. The female servant greeted him, "Please call me Nina." Though from the looks of it, She was a young girl who wasn't much older than Eugene. Eugene couldn't muster up much dissatisfaction for this. "If there is anything you need, please ring this bell," Nina said as she bowed her head and handed Eugene a small bell. She was probably in her late teens, at the very most. "Do you mind if I speak comfortably?" "Of course, please do so." "Am I the only one using this entire annex?" Eugene asked as he looked around the spacious annex. He was only asking for the sake of confirmation. Eugene knew that this couldn't really be the case. For one thing, Nina was far too young to oversee an entire annex by herself. "I'm afraid that is not the case, but there shouldn't be any discomfort during your stay." "So you're saying that I'm going to be living with some other relatives," Eugene confirmed. "Yes." "Do you know when they'll be arriving?" "They all should arrive within 4 days at the very latest." Eugene snorted at this reply. Because this just meant that he would be stuck here for 4 days. "Is there a gymnasium around the back?" "Huh?" "Yes." "Do I need permission from the main house to practice my swings with a wooden sword?" "That's..." "Because that's just what I'm going to do," Eugene declared with a smile as he headed straight to the gym. With a helpless look on her face, Nina trailed behind Eugene.